My name is Linda Smith, and I'm going to be the MC tonight. So I want to welcome everybody. I've been announcing the fact that this is going to be recorded. And please put your questions in the chat. So tonight's program is very timely because March 22nd was World Water Day. So it's fitting that we should have a program addressing our local Lake Worth Lagoon. So thank you, Reinaldo, for coming in tonight and helping us out. This is the agenda for tonight. Real quick, we're going to go through some local Loxahatchee group news. We'll break for a few question and answers. Then we're going right into the main program. And then we will have more questions at the end. If you don't already know us, I want to be able to introduce you to our executive committee. And we are all listed here, and if you see something that you might be interested in, whether it's conservation or political, or I would love if somebody wanted to be the membership chair, please feel free to reach out for us. Ida Foster, who has been working with events, is volunteering now to give people COVID-19 vaccinations. So we're going to be missing Ida, but Mary has graciously offered to help with some of the things that Ida was doing, but she doesn't want to do it alone. So we need to help out each other. As you know, Sierra Club is all about conservation. And this is from our conservation committee. We're going to be having a meeting next week if you want to join us. We are actively working on protecting and preserving areas in the Wellington Green. We actually had some very great news this week. We had a good turnout, and the Wellington Preserve wetland near the Wellington Mall is safe for now, but we can't let it get off of our radar. We are also working on protecting the Ag Reserve area in Palm Beach County, and there's a lot of interest in this issue. It's the almost 1 million square foot distribution center in the middle of the agricultural reserve. I'm actually getting phone calls from people trying to see what we know and what they can do. We are also working with the protection on the Lake Worth Lagoon from the development on the submerged lands. You've probably seen some things in the paper about that. And we have been an ongoing program of trying to reduce single-use plastics and protect our native tree canopy. So moving on to the political committee. This is the Florida legislative session. And all I can say is it's one of the good things is that it's short. It's only a 60-day session. And one of the bad things is it's short. It's only a 60-day session. So the Sierra Club could really use some help making phone calls, writing emails. We are trying to turn a very big, heavy, slow-moving ship. There are some links here on the slides to the Florida report, which will give you tips and tricks. Some of them even include text that you can either read to your representative or type into an email to your representative. And we would be nothing without our membership. And that said, our membership group needs some help, which I already mentioned. And this month we are spotlighting Reinaldo. And Reinaldo has been an active member of the Sierra Club since 2007. He originally volunteered as a leader for Inspiring Connections Outdoors, which it was so long ago, it was actually called the Inner City Outings at that time. Reinaldo has led many children from under-resourced communities on outdoor trips over the last 14 years. He combines his professional experience as a biologist with his volunteer experience as an activist to enrich children's knowledge of their local natural world. This photo, Reinaldo is accepting the Sierra Club's Denny and Ida Wiltshire Award on behalf of the Loxahatchee group. Reinaldo has also won the Pine Tree Award for exceptional group leadership from the Sierra Club Florida chapter in 2012. And Reinaldo's been an active member of the Loxahatchee group. In 2008, he served as group chair and from 2011 to 2017. For those of us that are kind of math challenged, I guess he was actually the chair for like 6 years. He has also been our group's newsletter editor from 2018 to 2021. So thank you, Ricardo. And if everyone can practice their Zoom skills and give him a nice big Zoom round of applause, or maybe a thumbs up, just to get you paying attention to what's going on here on the screen, give it a try. And that's also a great segue to the Turtle Tracks, which is the newsletter. Sandy Schwartz has been doing a great job. She has been taking over for Ricardo here recently. So we are inviting everyone to please sign up for the Turtle Tracks to keep current with the local information in our area. And just an alert, we're working on a new kind of format for the newsletter, which is either going to be starting next month or possibly the following month. So please pardon our dust if you see any, but we are working toward a different kind of platform for our newsletter. If you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. This is some of the upcoming things. One thing a lot of people don't know in our area is there's actually oil drilling exploration in the Bahamas going on. That is like 90 miles off our coast. So please feel free to take out your pencil and write down the notes. Go to Our Islands, Our Future, and please sign the petition. Last time we were talking about the ICO Film Festival. This time I'm just putting in a little plug for the Wild and Scenic Film Festival. Again, there's information here on the screen. It's a great family night, family movie night, if you will. It's going to have some beautiful scenery and great stories. And this we've been having on, but the Solar United Neighbors, actually this is their last meeting for this round of their co-op, April 15th. So if you are interested in getting information on solar or installing solar, please feel free to contact the Florida Solar United Neighbors and sign up for that meeting. And the Sierra Club is still working on a campaign to ask Publix to stop using the single-use plastic bags. Mary very graciously put the link in the chat. So you can even do that right now as you're listening to the end of this presentation. So don't feel like you can't do two things at one time. So I want to invite everyone to our next general meeting, which is going to be Thursday, April 22nd. We're going to have a presentation and a film from Samantha Core. She's the Senior Environmental Analyst at Palm Beach County Environmental Resource Management, Hidden Wild and Eco Film designed to inspire everyone to explore the outdoors. And now I would like to announce that the Loxahatchee Group is so grateful for the work of the Lake Worth Waterkeepers and all that they are doing. We are virtually handing Reinaldo a $500 check, but seriously, the check is in the mail. So you've probably heard that before, but the check is in the mail. So thank you, Reinaldo, and keep up the great work. And now what I'd like to do is introduce the main event. Reinaldo Diaz is our Lake Worth Waterkeeper. He founded the organization about 3 years ago to fulfill a need for a strong advocate specific to the Lake Worth Lagoon's watershed and its water quality. Reinaldo has a JD from Nova Southeastern University, where he focused on environmental and land use law with an emphasis on Everglades restoration. And as Lake Worth Waterkeeper, Reinaldo takes on multiple fields of work, from field work, water sampling, to educating all ages, and of course, legal and policy work. Reinaldo spent much of his life as a wildlife guide, especially in scuba diving, and is an avid fly fisherman and paddler. And Reinaldo, I'm going to ask you, what is a JD from Nova Southeastern University?
Sure thing. It's a Juris Doctor. Law degree.
Very impressive. I'm glad I asked. Holy cow. Okay, I am going to stop sharing my screen. So Reinaldo, you can start sharing yours. Mary, while he's doing that, do you know if we have any questions in the chat that we should discuss?
Not questions, but lots of fun shares going on about solar being obtained by some of our participants. Diane Goldberg and Ann Johnson just got some solar panels and saving lots of money. So that's exciting. They've gotten some good help and great discounts. And we are muted, everyone. We just happen to have an echo tonight, but we can deal with echoes.
I'm gonna mute myself. I have had some people say that when I mute, the echo goes away.
All right, there we go. I guess that's my cue to start. Thank you so much for the virtual and in the mail check. That's a surprise and highly appreciated. I mean, the feeling is mutual. I'm definitely always appreciative of what Sierra Club does for us in the community. Similarly, I mean, Lake Worth Waterkeeper, as you see, is an organization that I founded. If you're not familiar, I founded it in late 2017. We didn't really get started until 2018. We're a 501c3 and we're a member of Waterkeeper Alliance. Waterkeeper Alliance is an international organization that has 350 plus organizations around the world, and each waterkeeper, similar to riverkeeper, there's also bay keepers, any type of different water body. We're named after the watershed that we advocate for. So mine, of course, is the Lake Worth Lagoon. Across Florida, we have quite a few waterkeepers, many of which I'm sure you're familiar with, and we have been growing. When I started Lake Worth Waterkeeper, there weren't as many, but now there's more and more waterkeepers, and we're happy to team up. So what do I mean when I talk about the Lake Worth Lagoon and its history? It's really important when it comes to addressing the problems that the lagoon faces to really understand the history behind it, because it's really due to the lagoon's history why we have particular problems. Every connection that you see here on this map is man-made. Before these connections were made, we're talking 150, 200 plus years ago, Lake Worth Lagoon was actually a freshwater lake. It was landlocked. It had some connections, mostly through underground aquifer. It was part of the northern extent of the greater Everglades. And we're still part of the Everglades system. We're just in a different role. As most of you might know, we're now a northern estuary. And it's because of these connections that were made, predominantly that C51 canal connects us to Water Conservation Area 1, right? The refuge out west, Loxahatchee. And that breaks up into these three conveyances that connects us to Lake Okeechobee. That is our connection to the lake right now, and it's changing. It's very dynamic. It's a very complex watershed, especially compared to St. Lucie and Club-Loxahatchee, which is basically a straight shot river, and that's going to be important soon in a new issue that I'm going to bring up today. We also are connected to the C17, a C16 down in Boynton, but these are not connected to Lake O, so there's a big difference. So it's important to understand that. Back in the day, Lake Worth Lagoon was a freshwater lake. Today, it's a coastal estuary. So it went from lily pads and alligators to mangroves and manatees, right? And that change really kind of sets the tone for a lot of the problems that the lagoon has. Because of that change, the Lake Worth Lagoon is not legally defined a northern estuary of the Everglades. And because of that definition, we are often the rug that everything gets swept under, specifically Lake Okeechobee discharges. So we do quite a bit of work. One of the the work that we do is our data collection, our field work, water quality monitoring. This is an example of last week's water quality map that we build every week. We put it on throughout our social media. We're working on our website. It's going to be on our website regularly. But it kind of really highlights, obviously you have the lagoon, the northern end is PGA, right near that Publix by MacArthur Beach State Park. And then the southern end is down in Boynton, where Two Georges is over Ocean Drive. And so we do quite a few samples weekly. And you can tell last week it was kind of all over the map. We have some red, some yellow, some spots were good. Generally, the good spots are going to be close to the inlet where there's a lot of water movement, and also in the spots that have healthy habitat, mangroves and seagrass. Another thing that's really important to take into consideration. This is a picture of Jewel Cove, one of the living shoreline projects that we maintain for for the county. Another important thing to consider, because most of Lake Worth Lagoon, 80% of it, in fact, is seawalled. And there's 20% of remaining natural beach and shoreline, similar to what you see here. We do have riprap rock walls here to protect from erosion, but this stuff is getting rare in the lagoon. We're losing too much of it. So these living shoreline projects, they're really a gem. Jewel Cove especially. It's a really impressive project that covers multiple different types of habitats. And it's really important for obviously the species that would use these habitats, but for the benefits that these shorelines do in terms of cleaning our water and fighting climate change, because mangroves and seagrass are definitely our best carbon sink on the planet. This is across the way in Bryant Park. So you have a seawall and we have living shoreline planters. So this is kind of like the compromise between a natural shoreline and having some kind of habitat. And actually this Sunday at 3 at Bryant Park, we have one of our volunteer days where we'll be getting into some of these planters to get them ready and maintain these for the county. So we're working hard, the county, there's definitely different agencies, different groups that are working hard to bring habitat back to the lagoon. And so we'll get back to a big kind of the other side of that. We're working hard to build and fix the lagoon, and there's others working hard seemingly to destroy it. But one of the first issues, which is I wanted to bring up because you've already mentioned, is the offshore drilling in the Bahamas. And so the update to that is there was a well that was drilled. The company that did the drilling stopped the well. They capped it. It's where that yellow dot is down north of Cuba. And they are claiming that they had to stop drilling because of a geologic reason. We suspect that it's probably most likely because they ran out of money, because it's a really small company. They have something like 6 or 10 employees at most. And really their power is in holding the licenses for these offshore areas, which is the red that you see on this map. And so they capped this well, and they're currently essentially looking for investors or a buyer to buy their company and take on these leases with the intention of, they'll have the right to apply for more wells. This yellow dot here is 150 miles from Florida's coast. Obviously, this is right at the base of the Gulf Stream current. So similarly, Deepwater Horizon was 130 miles from Pensacola at the base or the start of the Gulf of Mexico current. And then on top of that, the drilling ship you see here, the Stena IceMax, which is what the company has been using, is the same type of exploratory well technology that Deepwater Horizon was. So yeah, I see that comment right. It's literally right. Some of their lands are in the marine protected area, so it kind of defeats the purpose of the marine protected area. This area in particular is really important as a nursery for lots of fish that are important to our fisheries, like mahi and such. But it goes beyond that. I mean, obviously, if there's a spill here, we all know what happened with Deepwater. The Gulf Stream is going to take that and affect our coast all along. So we do have a couple efforts. I put in the chat a link to the Our Islands, Our Future website, which you're going to see right at the top a petition that you can sign as an individual that's going to go to the Bahamian government, letting them know that this is a colossally bad idea and that even Floridians are against it. And so our big ask is for them to do a permanent moratorium. Again, once, when I started Lake Worth Waterkeeper, one of the first things I did was work on Amendment 9, which banned offshore oil drilling in state waters. So imagine that tiny sliver of 3 miles on the east coast of Florida. And so another idea of why we want this is if the Bahamas takes on a permanent moratorium in Bahamian waters, then just think of there would just be a narrow, the meat of the sandwich of you, if you will, of federal waters, where we'll be able to go to the federal government and say, both sides are protected. You might as well put a permanent moratorium in federal waters in between as well. So there's lots of reasons to ask for this. Clearly, because we don't want to spill, and that would affect us is the number one reason. We also have, in addition to that petition, I'll put a link to a Google document. We have a stakeholder letter where if you're involved with any other environmental NGO, if you know connections to big businesses, think like hotels, restaurants, people who would be affected by an oil spill, and also connections to municipal governments. We're reaching out to these 3 groups of stakeholders to sign on to this opposition letter that we're sending to the Prime Minister and his DPMs, the Deputy Prime Ministers, asking for the same thing, permanent moratorium, but also asking for their data from that first well so that we can independently analyze it and see what damage, if at all, was caused from that first well. We also need volunteers to reach out to these stakeholders. So if you have some extra time to send some emails, make some phone calls for us. I have 2 emails, Dale Taylor and Giovanna at lakeworthwaterkeeper.org. They're my coordinators on this, so please reach out to them and you'll be put on a list and given some contacts to help us reach out and get people to sign on to our stakeholder letter. So, and remember I said 80% of the lagoon is bulkheaded. So another very clear threat that we are facing is development, and that remaining 20% of natural shoreline is in danger of being turned into seawall. And that would be a disaster because natural shoreline is just critically important for seagrass, for mangroves, for different habitats. For example, horseshoe crabs, they will only lay their nests on a shoreline. Obviously, they cannot do anything with a seawall. So if we have seawall, we're going to lose that important area. There's an area south of MacArthur Beach State Park that I'm sure many of you have already heard of the work I'm doing against Rodney Barreto. There's a row of properties just south of the park that's all mangrove seagrass. It's a natural shoreline. It's some of probably the biggest chunk of the remaining 20% that's not already seawalled. And there's a handful of developers, there's 4 in particular, now Rodney Barreto is one of them, that are intent on filling in. They own these properties. The vast majority of the property is submerged. So according to them, their plans are to fill in that submerged land, turn water into land, and do different kinds of development. Rodney Barreto, we've been working on him because he had attached a plan of 330 plus condos in a marina that would destroy most of the 17 acres that he owned. Keep in mind, if any one of these properties were filled in, all of the properties would be destroyed. And all I can say about him, you guys have helped share as well. We had an email effort, an email campaign that would email Rodney Barreto. We've had other avenues of getting to him, and let's just say encouraging him to do the right thing and deed his property for protection. And all I can say about that is your emails are working, and he does know that he messed up, and he's working on doing the right thing, and we're making sure it's going to continue to happen. So hopefully soon we're going to have a really good update on that. But that's not stopping some of his friends. And one of his friends is Fane Lozman, who has this thing right here. If you've ever driven by the Cove, this is normally actually on the other side. This is a picture of it at Lakeside Park in North Palm Beach. And just the other week, in the middle of the night, it broke free. He has many of these, so you can see like there's a line on this dock. There's various lines. This is 8 pieces of a floating dock that's bolted together. At one point, we've counted 44 pieces on his property, and they're just very sketchily made, put together, so they break free constantly. This is one that has a container home on it that's really just a facade. And Lozman, his plan, his project, if you will, is claiming that he's going to build a series of floating docks, and he's going to have a series of floating homes that he's going to sell to people to live over the lagoon. This would obviously destroy the seagrass because it's way too shallow to have any kind of floating dock, really any dock. And it would, his project is already harming the seagrass and the mangroves. If he had his way, it would just completely destroy it. So he built this thing on his property as part of a fraud to claim homestead exemption, but it's really just a facade. One day last week, we got lucky because generally on his property, obviously it's his property, so I'm limited to aerial photography to see, to map out his project and what he's doing. But it broke free and it landed on public property at Lakeside Park in North Palm Beach. So I was able to really get an up close look at what exactly this thing is. And what it is that the pieces of dock that he has bolted together, looks like he pulled them out of a junkyard. I mean, the concrete is clearly crumbling. You can break chunks of it with your bare hands. That's a problem because if you imagine these things are basically 10-foot long concrete boxes, and the concrete is about 3 to 4 inches thick. And then inside that concrete, so it's 10 feet long, maybe like 8 feet wide, and then like 3 or 4 feet tall. And then the vast majority of that volume is expanded polystyrene, which is what you see in my hand there. That's styrofoam, right? And these things, they're meant to be floating in deep water, if at all. And they need to be maintained and not pulled out of a junkyard. You see this picture in the bottom in the middle, you see a big old crack right through the bottom. You see that through all of them because in this shallow water, these structures are pounding into the bottom. That's what's destroying the seagrass. At low tide, they're grounded. Then at high tide, they float and the waves are bouncing it up and down on the bottom. That, any structure can only take so much of that, especially if you pull it out of the junkyard, it's going to start falling apart. So they're cracking open, and then that styrofoam core is exposed, and all around these structures, you can see the little beads of the styrofoam being released into the lagoon. So not only is the structure pounding into the bottom, destroying seagrass, he has them tied up to mangroves, so it's hurting the mangroves, styrofoam's leaking out of it, all the metal is corroded, so there's a lot of heavy metal corrosion coming out, all kinds of problems with this project that he has, and it ends up, it's just a facade for him to claim homestead exemption. In 2020, he paid a whopping $91 in property taxes on his 9 acres. So how many of you have paid $91 on your property taxes? It's clearly a scam. I have this picture of this bolt here because the container is literally just sitting on top of the floating docks. There's 4 brackets on each corner and only one of them has a bolt. And this is what the bolt looks like. It's a miracle that this thing hasn't slid off and into the water, because a while ago he did have a container similarly situated that slid off, fell into the water, caused damage, had to be removed by a crane. So lots of environmental issues on top of the fact that his plan is to allegedly fill it in and turn this water into land. And that really comes down to, and brings us back full circle to the history of the Lake Worth Lagoon, because these properties south of the park, the way that they acquired it was because of an old piece of law well over 100 years ago. They're called TIF deeds. And you might have seen the article Rodney Barreto saying, well, the original TIF deeds gave me the right to fill this water in. It's like, well, we know a lot better, Rodney. Sorry. Uh, so it's like we know a lot better. We've had environmental regulation, growth management laws since that 100 years. And we know, the days of Florida turning water into land are hopefully behind us. And he should know better because, as Linda asked, what's his day job? Well, his day job, he's a developer. He has a development firm. He's a lobbyist. And then he also just so happens to be the chairperson of the FWC, the agency that is in charge of protecting our most endangered species in our fisheries, in our habitat. That agency, he is the top boss of that agency. And yet he had acquired this property 4 years ago for $425,000. And then he, using his connection, he didn't put his name directly on the property. We figured it out doing other work that we've been doing, but he started a shell company called Government Lot 1 LLC. He mistakenly listed himself as a manager. We figured out he owned it because of that, and we figured out that he was trying to attach this development plan. He brought that plan to the South Florida Water Management District a few years ago, and they basically laughed him out of the room saying, you're nuts, the mitigation is unachievable on this because the environmental harm is astronomical. And so he withdrew that permit. And then his next step was he tried to litigate a case from 1990 where if the court would have ruled in his favor, essentially the court would say that a state agency like the DEP for this TIF deed should be allowed to agree to not enforce their own laws. And that's a really important precedent to understand because he's the head of an agency himself. He should know better. If the DEP was allowed to say, we're just not going to enforce our own laws, it would just be opening the door for so many more of these coastal developments. And so we moved to intervene on this case. Well, first we asked the court that you shouldn't even open this case because it's ridiculous. It's from 1990. We've already moved on. It's in our past. And he's relying on 100-year-old laws, trying to say that he has a right to develop because of a law that was written 100 plus years ago. Well, 100 plus years ago in Florida, most humans weren't considered equal. Like what other gems of Florida's historic policy do we want to bring up from back then? So it's just a fraud fallacy argument. And so at the same time, we started our campaign of emailing him, of pressuring him to do the right thing and to drop this madness and to deed the property for protection. So we're hoping we cost him a lot of money. His development plan would have boosted the value to like $30 million or something like that. And so he, at that point, he likely would have gone to his friend, Governor DeSantis, and be like, hey, I have this property. You should buy it for the state for protection. I know I bought it for $425,000 4 years ago, but now I'm willing to let it go for 7 or 8 million. And knowing how DeSantis works, it probably likely would have happened. So like I said, all I can say is we know the pressure is working and we're hoping to have a good update on that soon. And that brings me to the last example of what I want to talk about, and that is the water quality monitoring, specifically Everglades, Lake Worth Lagoon's role in the greater Everglades system, and what's happening literally right now today. So this picture isn't from today. This picture was from like last year. This is at Lake Okeechobee. This is the 352 spillway. This is one of the 3 spillways that connects us. Remember that map in the beginning. This is the one in the middle that can connect Lake Okeechobee to the Lake Worth Lagoon. This is what the lake looks like when it's under a Cyanobacterial Bloom, which I'm almost expecting to happen really soon now because of how hot it is and how high the lake is. And it's a problem because the communities in the glades, they are hit hard by this. So you guys are well aware of the sugarcane burning that's going on right now. Then in the spring that stops because they're done harvesting. But then it's like summer happens and then the cyanobacteria blooms, which in these areas like this canal right here, which is a very popular sustenance fishing spot, which is what this man is doing right now. You can see the cyanobacteria. It's even on the rocks at this point. But they're still filling up their coolers with fish to eat, to take home and have for dinner. And these communities are subjected to the cyanobacteria bloom for 4 or 5 months out of every year. So it's almost like fall to spring, they have to breathe in the burning fields. And then from spring to fall, they have to deal with the cyanobacteria in the water. And they deal with it a lot. For years, I've had to fight the Department of Health to get signs posted on this, in this spot. And you can see if you look closely at this sign, it's actually very incorrect. It says red tide are in these waters. Well, red tide's a marine organism. It's not going to be in these waters. Cyanobacteria. You can see it's literally like a piece of paper that's stapled to a wood post. To me, this highlights, the sugar burning is the top example in the US of environmental racism. The lack of the warning signs and the lack of education for harmful algae blooms in these communities is definitely second place example of environmental racism. Because when you talk to the people in these communities, they just kind of accept it, right? It's part of life. They know they're getting hurt. They know that eating this fish is killing them, but they don't see a solution, or they don't see the capability to stand up to big sugar and actually do something about it. So we've been working on that. You know, they have obviously have a lot. They deal with this every year. We have to work on it often and regularly, just like the sugar burning, and slowly we start making headway. And that's on a good year. So we're not immune to that. If you live on a coast, if you live outside of the Glades communities, you know, you saw the map of the Lake Worth Lagoon watershed. The western half is the EAA, it's the sugar fields. Then you get to 441 by Lowe's. There's a structure there called the S155A Spillway. And then that is the deciding factor. That's the divider between the western half of our watershed and the eastern half. And the eastern half, of course, you know, handles Wellington and West Palm Beach and all the urban runoff that goes into the C51 canal, which runs along Southern Boulevard and into the Lake Worth Lagoon. Most of the time, that water is just local basin runoff. So it's polluted. It's certainly a problem we got to work on, obviously. But something that we don't get in the Lake Worth Lagoon is a cyanobacteria bloom until we take Lake Okeechobee water. And that's what you're seeing. I literally took this photo this afternoon. This is at the 155 Spillway, which is off of Dixie Road. Dixie, it's the one that you see, if you like it's that spillway you see right from the road, the divider between Lake Worth and West Palm Beach. If you like the restaurant Darbster, it's right there. So in this photo, you can see Darbster in the background, and there's a sign there saying blue-green algae is in this water. That algae bloom didn't get here without the help of us taking Lake Okeechobee water. You know, that's the avenue of what it got it. Because right now we're taking Lake Okeechobee water. And it's a constant battle that I have, especially with the Corps of Engineers, because even today, on the Rivers Coalition meeting, the Corps of Engineers was giving their presentation, and they were talking about Lake Okeechobee discharging as if it was something that hasn't happened yet. Oh, it'll probably happen in the future, but it hasn't happened yet. And it's just not true. So I flat out asked her, I was like, you know, they said, oh, well, 2,500 cubic feet per second is going south. And that's what we want. South is good, right? Except there is a problem in that definition. Remember how I said the Lake Worth Lagoon, by legal definition, isn't defined as a northern estuary. Scientifically, it's a northern estuary of the Everglades. But by legal definition, in particular, a piece of policy called the Northern Estuary Protection Program, NEP, that beginning section of that law gives you a list of definitions, and it says northern estuary, St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee. It specifically excludes Lake Worth Lagoon. So when the Corps of Engineers and the district say we're discharging this water south, legally they are correct. But scientifically and practical and just common sense definition, they're dancing around semantics, because right now the way it's set up, south also includes sending that water east into down to C51 and towards the Lake Worth Lagoon. And so right now, she was saying, oh, well, we did not send Lake Okeechobee water to the Lake Worth Lagoon, so you guys are good. But her own data says otherwise, and I'm actually bringing that up right now. This is let me stop sharing and I'll share again. So this map right here, so you see those three the three structures, right? The C10A, this S352, and the 351, and that southeast part of the lake. Those are the three that connect to the refuge, WCA1, and then it also connects down to C51 canal, which goes to Lake Worth Lagoon. Well, you see numbers, right? That's cubic feet per second going through those three structures. None of it is going into the Water Conservation Area 1. That's because right now the STAs are struggling a bit. They are getting hit pretty hard. So they need to protect it. So where is that water going? Well, I can tell you the C10A and the 352 is going towards what we call the L8 Basin. It's the sugar farms. It's in the EAA. They're using some of this water to irrigate their fields, but not all of it obviously can be used to irrigate their fields. So the rest of it goes down to C51 and into the Lake Worth Lagoon. But then you look here at the 7-day average outflows, and conspicuously absent, you notice it says south. You have east, and it specifically designates the two structures of the St. Lucie. And then there's south, which is taking most of the water, 49% of the water. But they make no distinction between what is going actually south to the lower Everglades, which is good. That's good south discharging, versus how much of that is going towards us, the Lake Worth Lagoon. And their own data shows that some of that water is making its way towards us, because every structure along the way is open. And so that really, bring it back to our keynote here. So that's what you're seeing here. This is the water. This is the canal side of the spillway. So this is fresh water. And then you go to the lagoon side, and it gives you the yellow. There may be waters. And the reason why they can do that is because on this side of the spillway, as the water goes through, it's very dynamic. It's really rough. So it gets dissipated and not as readily apparent on the surface of the water. If you live in Lake Clark shores, look in your lake, you probably have some cyanobacteria back there right now as we speak. And they hide behind the complexity of our watershed, right? It's not a straight shot like St. Lucie and Club-Loxahatchee. So they hide behind that complexity. They hide behind the numbers and the data and the fact that it is really difficult to determine when we take Lake Okeechobee waters. And so it's really important that we as organizations, and I'm sure Drew can attest to this, it's really important for us to be active in this, in particular the LOSUM process that's going on right now, the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual, which is the piece of policy that determines how Lake Okeechobee is managed, right? And where this water goes. Well, the majority of the models and the alternatives that they are presenting results in even more discharging towards the Lake Worth Lagoon. So they're hiding behind the policy definitions and saying, yeah, we're sending the water south, wink, wink, right? Big old wink. And it's like, yeah, but south also includes Lake Worth Lagoon, and they're not honest about that, and they're hiding behind it. So it's really important that we as organizations and as individuals get involved in this process and remind them that there is a community around the Lake Worth Lagoon that doesn't want Lake Okeechobee discharges just as bad as St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee. And I'll tell you, with those Rodney Barreto comments, and I even heard this from people, is that the comments that people heard from other parts of the state coming from our community, many people on the West Coast and other areas were very impressed at not just the passion and the determination of the people that commented to Rodney on how he needed to protect the Lake Worth Lagoon, but how well researched, how very thoughtful, and just well educated on these issues that the community is here. And we need to take that momentum, and we need to be more involved in things like Lake Okeechobee and Everglades issues, because if not, this stuff is knocking on our door to happen more often. And we certainly don't want to be the next Caloosahatchee or St. Lucie. And I guess with that, I can open it up to questions.
Well, thank you for that. I just want to say you are so knowledgeable and you have so many understandings of this complex and nuanced situation. And you've lived down here, I think, your entire life. So you've always been full of antennas and always listening and reading. So, I do have a very interesting question here in the chat from one of our members, Kate. Kate Weingart. Let's see if I got the question. Can we start a petition to tax the sugar industry to pay for the water restoration projects? Well, let's hear you. What?
I mean, so the money is there, right? One thing you always hear the government say is that, oh, well, these things are expensive, they take time, blah, blah, blah. No, that's BS. The water is there. The problem is that the water gets spent. I mean, the money gets spent where it doesn't need to be. And so much of our tax dollars go to the sugar industry, in particular through a piece of law called the Farm Bill. Now, as a whole, we need the Farm Bill. That includes things like, food stamps and social assistance programs. There's a lot in this giant piece of legislation, right? Thousands of pages long. Unfortunately, this is what they always do, log rolled right into that giant piece of policy is also the sugar subsidy program. And sugar farmers in the EAA, it's almost like there's no incentive of them to be efficient, right? They don't really make their money from selling sugar from the EAA. They have those fields in like Dominican Republic and throughout the Caribbean. That's where they sell sugar. That's how they make that money. In the EAA in Florida, the way they make their money is by simply owning literally 500,000 acres of land, because land ownership is power in the West. And they derive so much subsidies by owning that land on top of the subsidies in the Farm Bill that basically say whatever sugar you don't sell, we, the federal government, using taxpayer dollars, we're going to buy whatever is left. And you're going to be guaranteed 100% selling your crop yield. So it's like, why try, right? Just own the land and take all that money. So petitions, that kind of that kind of benefit that they receive is extremely valuable. Obviously, we're talking billions. And so they work right into their budget, lots of money to support candidates who end up being our legislators and who make decisions on these policy. And it's both sides of the political aisle that fall for this. And so taking that money away from them in terms of subsidy is a monumental task. Petitions are great, but the problem with petitions is that your addressee of the petition has to listen to it. And right now, without really substantial campaign finance reform, I feel we're going to struggle with that sort of effort. But there's other ways of fighting them. So, we'll continue.
So Kate, does that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up questions for Reinaldo? You can unmute. Let's see if you can, if the system will let you do that. Oh, let's see. So if there are other questions, put them into the chat. Now is your chance. Otherwise, I have, another ask of Reinaldo. And, that is what other strategies, what other solutions? You
Mhm.
just alluded to, there are other solutions, you
Right.
said.
So
Uh-huh.
it's, elections have consequences. So critically important to make sure we get people and support our legislators that are going to make good decisions, right? I work closely with people like Ana Escamani, for example. She listens, she gets it. Legislators who are going to put their community first instead of their corporate, their corporate owners or donors, whatever you want to call them. Those are the people that we need to support. And more importantly, when it comes to elections, even local elections, we talked about Chris McVoy just becoming a commissioner. We need to support these people throughout every step of the process, right? Anytime we need to find these community leaders. I ran for state senate, for example, and we need to do everything we possibly can to get these people, people like us into power, because until we have substantial campaign finance reform, um, we're going to be inching our way towards progress when we should be doing a full marathon, full sprint.
Okay, we want to stay encouraged on that and hear
Yeah.
what Reinaldo is saying. Stay encouraged. They've lifted up and
Yeah.
pumped up. We got to keep that hope
Yeah.
that we do have what you said, which is we each have our voice. We've got people in this room who are leading the way in writing letters to the editor. So just a shout out to Sheila Calderon and many others that are persistently writing, calling, texting, emailing. That's the pathway to
Yeah.
making these changes persistently.
It's
right?
so important, just like for the Bahamas oil. I mean, there's a reason why we are reaching out and making those phone calls. I know it's tedious. I know it's not glamorous. Everyone wants to go out in the field with me and plant mangroves and do all that stuff, but the the biggest impact we can do is that communication is to getting people voting. If you want inspiration, look what happened to Lake Worth and flipping the commission. And it's just a group, small group of us wildly progressive, just propping up our candidates to make sure that, after 10 years of a toxic administration, we work together to get people in. I see a question about oysters. So that's a really interesting problem that we're dealing with. So oysters in the Lake Worth Lagoon, there's different ways of doing it. You'll see a lot of areas they'll use like the bags of oyster shells and put them out. That hasn't worked too well historically in the Lake Worth Lagoon. For some reason in our lagoon, the oysters are hyper picky about what depth and what salinity range they want. But so there hasn't, so the in particular, they haven't been focusing too much on that because they were tired of putting out oyster bags and then it just being buried in muck or just getting lost. But we've been making some interesting headway in that you saw that picture of Jewel Cove with the riprap walls around, and those are in that project. The rock is pretty big. They're like the size of watermelons, right? Like, and bigger. But what we've been finding, or specifically what has been finding, on those rocks, we do get some oysters to get on it. But interestingly enough, and they're working on figuring it out, what they're finding is the smaller the rock is, think grapefruit and smaller, uh, a lot more higher rates of oysters attaching to the rocks. And inside MacArthur Beach State Park, FWC and the park DEP, they did an oyster reef in the cove. Like if if you've ever walked over that bridge north, you'll see that island in the middle of Lake Worth Cove. Well, to the left of that, there's an oyster reef that was built almost as an experiment, and they're all smaller, like grapefruit sized rocks and smaller. And we're seeing that it's a lot more successful in bringing in oysters that way. So it's on the horizon, making headway on that. It hasn't been a big focus up until recently, really. Similarly, actually planting seagrass is the next step. We would love to do like a nursery locally and start planting seagrass like we do with mangroves. But similar situation, seagrass, of course, really picky about where they get planted. And we also need to make sure that they're not going to get buried, because we have planted seagrass plugs out in the lagoon And then like a week later, we take Lake Okeechobee discharges and then it gets buried in 6 inches of mud. So we need to be involved in LOSUM and make sure that they don't do that, so that when we do plant stuff, that our plants aren't going to get lost and our hard work will be for nothing.
So I think it's not possible for us to individually unmute. And I don't want to unmute everybody, so that we're just looking for any other questions while we have Ronaldo's attention. We have maybe a minute or two.
I
So
see.
let's see.
I see something about Loxahatchee River, right? Loxahatchee had oyster mats, the same for Indian River Lagoon, and I think that's mostly because those rivers, it's a one-way shot, right? So they are tidally influenced, but the tide comes in and out in one direction. Lake Worth Lagoon is a lot more complicated. We have 3 inputs and we only have 2 outputs, right? The 2 inlets. So the way that the water moves throughout the lagoon is not just a straight shot. It's a lot more dynamic and a lot more complicated. And I think that might have a reason why oyster mats haven't been working as well, but we're getting closer. I see something about, oh, lots of scrolling. Okay, so Lake Park and those communities that have seawall. So there are, you saw that picture of Bryant Park, and if you come out on Sunday, you'll see the planters. We call them planters, and it's what we would call shoreline softening. So when you have a seawall, right, and then you have the bottom, not a good situation because the waves hit it. It's a lot of energy. The waves bounce off the wall, and there's a lot of movement. And with that, lots of movement, stuff on the bottom, like seagrass, like horseshoe crabs, they don't like that. They want calmer water. They can't handle that kind of movement. So that's why when you see a seawall, you call it shoreline hardening, right? So back in the day, people still think, oh, you want to fight sea level rise, just harden our shoreline, build more walls. Well, obviously we know now that's not that effective. So we took that term back from them and we call it shoreline softening. So instead of having a wall, okay, the compromise, if you have the wall, then have something in front of that wall. Have that riprap rock, have mangroves, because the mangroves are going to create habitat. And then when the waves hit the mangroves, it's going to soften the impact and it's going to protect the seawall. So on top of cleaning water, habitat, fighting climate change, if you have a seawall that costs you 6 figures to put in, that's supposed to only last, 30, 40 years. Well, now that seawall all of a sudden can last 60, 80 years if you have a shoreline in front of it. And there are opportunities working with we do this all the time, or we try to, especially condos and areas that have like a really substantial seawall. We can build a planter just like what's at Bryant Park, but we need the participation of the owners, like the condos or the landowners. The county can help with the design and whatnot. And we can even go as far as, if it's a substantial project, we can go up to Tallahassee and get matching money to help with these projects, So we need the owner's cooperation, the town's cooperation, and then we as the county and as Lake Worth Waterkeeper, we can hopefully get Tallahassee to help cover some of the costs, because there are grants available for living shorelines.
Wow, those are exciting thoughts right there. All that you just said was a real mouthful, but
yeah,
hey,
it's
food
a lot
for thought, steps for us to take.
Yeah.
Grants, you say, homeowners, condo owners,
Yep.
people all around there in those neighborhoods.
And a lot of people say, well, I want to protect my view. And it's like, well, what is your view? Do you want to see dead, polluted water, or do you want to see beautiful mangroves with birds and fish? And, because if you see Jewel Cove, especially, it's incredible, some of the wildlife we can see there. Now I see the Lake Worth Lagoon compared to the other waterways. So it's a struggle. Lake Worth Lagoon is small in comparison, but our watershed is huge. So our input ratio is 42-1. So what that means is basically if you take a square mile or whatever of the water body in the lagoon, then for every one of that square, you're going to have 42 of land in the watershed inputting into the lagoon. So 42-1 is the ratio. To put that into comparison, Indian River Lagoon is 5-1. Biscayne Bay, which has all of Miami and all that dense stuff, is I think it's still only like 10 or 11-1. So Lake Worth Lagoon has a lot of input concentrating into a small water body. So right now, it could be worse. I'll say that. We have, somebody mentioned the Blue Heron Bridge. You know, I was a dive guide before. That bridge consistently labeled one of the top dive sites on the planet, right? It's like, I used to guide people would pay me thousands of dollars to go to places to photograph frogfish. And here we can literally go like on our lunch break, you know, underneath a bridge, like to see these animals. Like you don't have to go to Indonesia to see a striated frogfish. Like you could do it on your lunch break. Really special. So we have that. And that's kind of what I touched on earlier is, you know, we're given this, like its history is complicated in that we kind of got screwed because it was changed into a coastal estuary. But we can use that. It gives us a unique opportunity. Okay, like when we talk about restoration, we're not gonna go back to a landlocked freshwater lake, but we know better now. We have super talented scientists at we can engineer a better habitat, and that better habitat is a coastal estuary. It's literally the best habitat with the most biodiversity on the planet. I mean, in terms of biomass, it's twice the biomass of even the Amazon rainforest. So if you take a cardboard box that's like a foot in each direction, throw it out in a mangrove seagrass at Jewel Cove, for example, and you count all the plant bacteria, all the microbial and animal species, you're going to find twice as much different species in that box than if you did the same thing in the Amazon. And what that leads to is, think about, you know, so far what we understand, what we understand of life on Earth is all life on Earth is carbon based, right? And so what plants do in terms of photosynthesis is they're pulling that carbon out of our atmosphere, whereas doing harm. Carbon is not the enemy. You always hear carbon is greenhouse gas. It's terrible. It's the enemy. It's not. We need carbon. That's what brings us life. We just don't want it in the atmosphere. And when we have plants and efficient habitat to bring it into life that exists, then we're locking up that carbon in that life and that biomass. And seagrass and mangroves, since they're that dense in biomass, they are by far the most efficient at being what we call a carbon sink. They're pulling that carbon out and they're dispersing it to the plants, to the little crabs, to all the fish, everything. I mean, I saw a statistic recently that 90% of our fisheries depend on seagrass as a habitat for their nursery. So.
Okay, someone's asking about that Jewel Cove,
Jewel Cove.
Exact coordinates.
Yeah, so Jewel Steinhardt Cove, if you go over the bridge towards Lake Worth Public Beach, you go over the bridge, it's on your right-hand side, across A1A from the public beach. So you can park at the public beach, like park along the road, you walk across the street, and it's hidden. I mean, Jewel is obviously named after the first name that Lake Worth had, Lake Worth, the town. And it's named Jewel Steinhardt Cove after the Steinhardt family who owned the land and basically allowed this to happen. And there's no parking on the road. If you ride your bike, if you drive by, you'll miss it, even though it's really big. It's 1,600 feet long, but it's hidden behind a wall of like sea grapes and mangroves. And when you walk through those trees, you'll see exactly what I showed in that one picture, a beautiful greenscape that covers mangrove habitat, covers a coastal hammock, has a beach habitat and sea grape, different habitats. Really cool project.
Yeah. I know also across the way, across Lake Worth Lagoon, you can rent your kayaks right from the Lake Worth Municipal Golf Course.
Yes.
Get a double kayak and save money and see all those oyster beds, all that you can see, right?
Right. And I didn't even touch on Snook Islands, which of course is like the pinnacle project of Shoreline. I mean, literally building islands. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Those are friends of mine too, Kayak Lake Worth. Great group to rent kayaks from, and you're starting right in a good part of the Lake Worth Lagoon that when I was a kid, didn't exist in that condition. I mean, when I was a kid, we never fished Bryant Park unless you actually wanted like trash fish, right? And now, or what fishermen call trash fish. And now we have data. A little while ago, we did a seine net where I was pulling up larvae of bonefish and tarpon, which, those fish are their own economy. If you know anything about fishing, bonefish in particular, people will spend thousands of dollars in a day just to fish for one of those. So the
And they're
fact that
very elusive.
they're very
right?
elusive, but not in a Lake Worth Lagoon. In the northern part of Lake Worth Lagoon, FWC has done some seine netting studies where they sampled something like 30 sites or 30 different locations. And in every single one, they pulled at least 2 bonefish, which is extraordinary. And it happened to be in that area where Rodney Barreto, Fane Lozman, Dan Taylor are trying to threaten to develop because of, no surprise, the seagrass and the mangroves.
Yeah. So just another question on LOSM and what is that an acronym for? Just
That
for
is,
a big general audience.
yeah, that is an acronym for the Lake Okeechobee Systems Operating Manual. And it's basically the policy that says if X conditions, then Y, this is where the water goes, right? So like if the lake or whatever rain conditions or whatever lake stage the Lake Okeechobee is at, then the decisions are made of where that water is going to go. Is it going to go into the STAs? Is it going to go into the northern estuaries? And so right now, they take a look at that policy every number of years, and right now they're taking a look at it to do an update.
So if I don't see any more questions, I want to ask a question. What would be one recommendation that you have? Anybody wants to learn, let's say they just came to this area, they don't know very much. What is something, where could they go, or what could they attend if there's any such local conference or local organizations that they could join or support besides us? We want you, we do have things for people to do in this group, but we want to see ourselves in light of other groups.
Right.
How,
That's such a great question, because I encountered this way too much, and I'm sure you have too. Sierra Club, I know, definitely has sympathy for this situation, but there's too much infighting. Let's just be honest. There's too much infighting in the environmental community, especially in the Everglades community. There's too many groups who it's almost like they're trying to compete with each other. And it's like, we might not agree 100% on all the little nuances of what we want, but we absolutely agree on our goals, right? So it's like, let's, work together. We work together obviously really well, so there's no issue there, but there's so many groups that are helpful, and we need to be encouraging of them to get them involved and speak out more on these things. Like if you're a fisherman, for example, West Palm Fishing Club is such a great resource. They have been around forever. There's a lot of them. Tom, the president, he understands these really issues really well. Maybe the members need some help understanding it, right? It's a lot of grimy, salty fishermen. I see Florida Native Plant Society. That's a great one to bring up, because I myself am a gardener. A lot of you are friends with me on Facebook, so I'm sure you're hounded by my pictures of what I grow. And I'm definitely a regenerative agriculture nerd, and I'm way into food forests and permaculture and the like, and native gardens as well, because like Doug Talemi says, if we all did that, our part in our own backyards, it would all link together and make by far, the biggest impact for our environment. And that holds especially true with our watershed. If we all did native, if we all did, water friendly gardening, not using glyphosate. I'm sure you all saw the recent study about manatees and glyphosate, not using our chemicals, using plants that's going to actually have roots instead of turf grass, bring that soil health back. And we won't have to, we almost wouldn't have to spend so much time. It wouldn't be so much of an emergency to help to protect these habitats, because then we would be cleaning that water on our own lawns before it goes down the street and into the gutter. So Native Plant Society is also a great one. Mount's Botanical Garden, if you want to take a walk through there, if you haven't already, you'll learn so much just by walking through there. And of course, I always like to say, because it's always surprising to me, the people that I talk to, who many people don't even know what the Lake Worth Lagoon is. They might understand it as the intracoastal. So one of the most important things you can do is stop working and just go have fun out there in the water, right? Rent that kayak, paddle around, go do your birding on Bryant Park, go see what's out there. And you'll see, if you're out there enough, you're going to see some really impressive wildlife that's going to just inspire you to protect it more. I mean, no promises, but spend enough time on the bridge looking at Snook Islands, and you'll probably see a pod of dolphin every once in a while swim by. I know I have.
Wow.
Yeah, there's all kinds
I'm
of
sure.
good things going through.
So just be an observer and active participant outdoors. And Kay says, go out and volunteer
Yes.
for ERM. ERM is always looking for people to go out into their scrub areas and pick up.
Yep.
And even when we're outdoors, we need to be thinking all the time, what can we do to pick
Yeah.
up trash? I know our
Right.
own Chair Linda constantly out on her boat picking up
Yeah.
items with her husband in the
And
water.
we have events every month, twice a month generally, where we maintain our living shorelines. We alternate between Bryant Park, which is what we're doing on Sunday at 3, and Jewel Cove. And we go out there. Of course, a big part of that is picking up garbage, but sometimes it's removing invasive plants, it's rebuilding the riprap on the wall. It's all kinds of things. It depends on what the shoreline needs that we'll maintain it.
So if we want to get involved with you, because you do such a variety,
Uh-huh.
and you can really mix it up and make it fun, how
Right.
can we get in touch with you on that Sunday
So-
project?
So right now, we're really active on Facebook, especially. We have an events page. We're currently working on our website. We have some back end stuff we got to fix that will update with our events and a calendar, because we do shoreline work days really regularly, like I said, twice a month. And there's more in the works in terms of field work. We're going to be the Palm Beach County coordinator for FWC for their horseshoe crab tagging program.
Wow.
So
So
we'll be able
wait,
to-
that's all under your umbrella as
Yes,
Lake
as
Worth
Lake Worth
Indian
Waterkeeper.
Waterkeeper.
Yeah.
And they can actually, you have a website
Yeah.
and you have your volunteer opportunities. I know you're doing so much, so I don't know how you
yeah.
put that up there.
So the website, I'll put the link in the chat. So yeah, we're working on the website. You can join our email list too. We do send email updates. The horseshoe crab thing is in the
Perfect.
works. And we're working on the website. You'll get some more information out of there, but we'll have a calendar just like we do on our Facebook page of all our events and whatnot. And you can
Yeah,
come
because
out.
that's a really good way to see up close, because you're doing science, you're doing legal stuff,
Yeah.
you're doing creative stuff. You do like a whole variety. You're into
Yeah,
all
I do a
broad
little bit of
spectrum,
everything.
really.
Yeah.
So
I see the
Yeah.
comment about the labeling of storm drainage. That's been a big dream of mine. I think now that we have a friendly Lake Worth commission, that's a very big possibility now. Because I've always thought it'd be fun to do paintings at each of the drains to remind people that all drains lead to the Lake Worth Lagoon. So
okay, I'm going to mute, and Linda's going to.
she.
So I believe there's still more we're doing. Yes, Linda. So I'm going to let you take over. Thank you, Reinaldo.
Thank you for having me
right.
anytime.
Yeah, we have to keep up with what you're doing for the environment. You're doing 200,000%.
Oh,
So
same for
you're
you. Yeah.
you're our motivation. You really.
Thank you. Same for you.
Yes.
The sugar burning is so important to me. Patrick is a law school classmate of mine. So we're, I think we're each doing good work. So we're definitely on the
Yeah.
right side of environmentalism.
Well, we're glad we have you in our area and our midst
Thank
and
you.
everything like that. Stay here. Do not go. The area needs you.
The fishing
Yeah.
is too good here. I won't move.
Yeah, all right. Great. Okay, I'm going to bounce back on. Linda, did you want to just conclude now, or are we doing any more of a PowerPoint? She can't, she's still muted. I'm not sure. I guess we have a problem again. So we'll just say good night all, and thank you for all your attention. It was a great evening, and we'll see you out there. Okay, bye-bye. Take care.